The Putin regime has been widely exploiting the vulnerabilities of global social media platforms, using bots and trolls to promote specific stories and narratives. But the Russian propaganda does not work exactly how most people think it does. The interventions of the trolls, agitators, and propagandists often fail to directly promote pro-regime narratives in political discussions, but they do succeed in distracting people from having open discussions that are critical of the state. Welcome to the counterintuitive world of Russian disinformation operations, populated by a rogues gallery of toxic yet highly effective propagandists. Thank you for watching Silicon Curtain. All our content is also available on popular podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please like and subscribe to help new people find our fantastic speakers. And of course, if you enjoy the content, consider supporting us by becoming a patron. Julia Davis is a columnist at The Daily Beast and internationally known writer and investigative journalist. She is also a Washington Post contributor, national security and foreign policy reporter, and analyst with Russian Media Monitor. Julia Davis has broad background as a national security, counterterrorism, and immigration expert. She is a former federal officer, having served with the Department of Homeland Security, Customs, and Border Protection. She writes as an investigative reporter, exposing Russian propaganda, discussing foreign policy, international and domestic affairs, and other issues. Julia's reports have been featured by CNN, The Washington Post, Rolling Stone, Business Insider, Newsweek, The Hill, and many other outlets. And I'm sure many people on this channel will be familiar with her work that is posted on Twitter and LinkedIn. Julia, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much for having me.
And of course, we will, for those probably tiny number of people who aren't familiar with your work, we will, of course, pop the links into the description of this video. But as I said, many people interviewing this channel, many people watching this channel will be avid followers of the work you do. Well, let's start there. How did it begin, and what really takes up your time at the moment? Because extracting all of these propaganda videos, watching the original sources, translating them, this is a fairly Herculean task you're engaged with.
Yes, it is. When Russia first invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, I have noticed that the coverage in the West did not quite measure up to the level of the threat that Russian propaganda was posing. I would see things as they were happening back there, hearing from the original sources, listening to the television from both sides, Ukraine and Russia, and then I would watch the way RT, that was at the time prominently present in the United States, broadcasting on our television networks, the way they would portray these events was completely untrue and full of propaganda, unchecked propaganda, and our media did not pay adequate attention to dispelling the lies and propaganda that they were piping straight into American households and actually doing it worldwide. They are broadcasting in multiple languages and are affecting multiple regions of the world. So when I saw how prevalent the lies were in their reporting, I took it upon myself to start creating collections of debunked Russian lies, just to make the English-speaking world more familiar with what's going on in Russia, how Russia knowingly lies about certain things, and giving examples that people could see for themselves what really happened versus the way they've been reporting it. And my collection kept growing and growing from dozens into hundreds. And then I started writing articles about it, and the Daily Beast invited me to become a columnist for them, which I still do to this day. And things kept on going from there. And following Russian propaganda, I could basically see where it was going straight from the mouth of the propagandists themselves, because they're not just broadcasting in a vacuum. They're being told specific angles, specific lines of propaganda that they're pushing, and there is a specific reason for it. For example, for the last 9 years or so, they have been very actively dehumanizing Ukrainians, often referring to them as pigs, traitors, and basically preparing the population for what was to come. And about a year before the invasion, conversations on Russian state television were constantly ending with them concluding that Russia will invade Ukraine and take for itself all of it or the portions that it's most interested in. And at the time, a lot of people did not understand what I was doing or would tell me, well, it's just for domestic consumption. Of course, it is for their domestic consumption, but with a very specific reason behind it. And that's what is so fascinating. They have been laying the groundwork for what happened with Putin's full fledged invasion of Ukraine, which, of course, I continue to cover when he invaded. And again, the propagandists would signal what would happen long before it happened. For example, they've been preparing the Russians to the idea that Russia would have to destroy Ukraine's infrastructure, that they would have to make Ukrainians freeze in winter, starve, that they would have to cause their sewers to overflow for there to be epidemics, that they needed to drive masses of Ukrainians to Europe to create a refugee crisis. So all of this was signaled well in advance of what they actually did later on. So in that sense, it's very informative. And also, another angle that kept me going is I have been collecting their genocidal rhetoric, which has grown to an enormous extent, and it's very revealing because while their government is denying that they're engaged in genocide, their state media is quite specific to the point where one lawmaker actually revealed that he had calculated that about 2 million Ukrainians would have to be killed in order for Russia to dominate Ukraine. So I also approach it as collecting evidence for future war crimes tribunals, and that also is what keeps me going.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many things to unpack there, and like a horrific Bond movie, the villains have been telling us exactly what they intended to do. Putin himself, in his pseudo-academic sort of mythologizing of history, in his paper that he wrote, like Mein Kampf, he also told us exactly what his intentions were. Ukraine doesn't exist. It's not real. Ukrainians who are independent have been sort of, got to by the West, and they view Ukrainian nationality as almost like a viral disease, and as you say, they totally dehumanize it, and they talk of Ukrainian identity as either a disease or they relate it to some kind of tumor or infection, or as you say, they use sort of animalistic comparisons as well. Why were we not paying attention, not just in 2021? But earlier than that, as you say, since 2014, when this really started to ramp up.
I think a lot of people had a problem perceiving this as being real. It seems so cartoonish almost, where on my YouTube channel for the Russian Media Monitor, that's one of the comments that I get most often. People say, well, this is like James Bond villains. If you wrote it in the movie, you'd be told that it's too much, that it's unbelievable. And I think people just had this mental block, refusing to realize that in this day and age, something like this could really happen, that history would be repeating itself in the worst way when probably many people thought that the days of these kinds of wars or genocidal imperial aspirations were behind us. And it's a startling, rude awakening for many.
And of course, when you mention the propagandists, one of the reports you made a couple of weeks ago really struck me. And it's not that Solovyov, Simonyan, and all the others, it's not that they're spouting this stuff and somehow they're deluded or don't realize what they're doing or what they're supporting. they're fully aware, aren't they, of the genocidal rhetoric. They're fully aware, I think, that the morality of it is wrong. They're smart enough to realize, I think, between the narratives which are pure lies and what is underneath it. Semenya, after all, studied in the United States. I mean, she knows how the West works. She knows how the Western media works. Um, and there are moments of clarity, aren't they, where they admit to themselves almost on camera that if they're ever caught, if they're ever extradited, then they would be the subject of a war crimes tribunal.
Absolutely. They fully realize what they're doing. Both Simonyan and Solovyov speak English, and they obsessively watch Western media to see how this is being covered. And also, sometimes they will slip up and say things like, well, many people in Russia still don't understand what we're doing in Ukraine. And sometimes with these things, you can't understand why this was necessary. But maybe decades later, we will understand. So, this to me reveals that they fully realize that there is no way to explain or justify what they're doing. So they're just trying to comfort people by telling them, well, you just don't understand it now. Later on, you'll understand why this was necessary. And Solovyov as well, who throughout his career had changed his position many times and sort of goes whichever way the wind blows, and is I think it's because there's no way to logically justify what they're doing that he has become so enamored with the idea of using religion to justify it, which to him is basically any religion. Anybody that he could recruit or help recruit to go fight there, it's fine to him. And he's sitting in his studio practicing Jew, chanting Allahu Akbar or calling to the Orthodox people or Buddhists. It doesn't matter to him as long as those bodies will go to the front and fight for Putin, which is basically what it's all about, for Putin's imperial ambitions. So
And
yes, they fully realize what they're doing, and that the accountability for them will come if it ever comes to the point where um, Russia loses this war and the Western world gets their hands on them. They fully know that they would be tried and convicted.
And of course, Semenya, as head of RT, had a huge ability to project narratives into the Western media, which of course they did until in many countries RT was forced off the airwaves. I would say sort of thank goodness, because it was a clever propagandistic tool, which many took at face value, assuming it was, a mainstream media source. But that hasn't stopped their narratives being injected into the Western bloodstream. And in particular, you have a channel GB News, which actually isn't that bad in terms of Russian narratives, but of course you have AON, Fox News. You do have many sources in the US that are directly injecting Russian propagandistic tropes and narratives into the American consciousness.
Yes, there are. And Simonyan had herself called RT a weapon in an information war. So she definitely realizes what they're doing. She also said that after they were blocked, they have come up with other ways of spreading propaganda in the West, except they're no longer using it with RT's label. So she said they have influencers in place, they have certain accounts in place where they're still broadcasting it, they're creating videos. I think she said in 39 languages, maybe the number that she cited, and growing all the time. So they're still very actively spreading their propaganda. And also, there are useful idiots that are helping them do it as well. All they have to do is just drop that seed in the right place in the social media, and time again they will pick it up. They're very familiar with our politics, they watch them closely, they listen to the talking points, they're listening to what's causing arguments, and then they inject their own agenda into it. For example, if there are talks about our banks here in the United States and financial issues, they will immediately drop the seed in there. Well, you should be doing that instead of helping Ukraine. And inevitably, someone here will pick that up without thinking what is behind it. So they've been very successful. They are not stupid people. They are doing it in a smart way. It is a weapon, one of the tools in Putin's disinformation toolbox and a part of his hybrid war against the West.
And let's combine two of the things we talked about here. One is the weaponization of religious narratives, or certainly just weaponization of the Orthodox Church and under the Moscow Patriarch. And we'll come to the split in a minute because, of course, that's a significant point of countering Russian propaganda is in actually disassociating yourself with Russian institutions, as the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has done. But let's throw a name out there, Tucker Carlson. Is frequently mentioned on RT, and is frequently mentioned, and clips of him replayed on Russian state TV, as well as are some sort of the more extreme GOP politicians as well. And one of those issues where there's really a connection, isn't there, between Russian propaganda and its sort of useful idiots in the West, is the culture war, is the weaponization of morality. So what's your perception of that? It's not, I don't think, that the propagandists are innately moral, but they have found a chink in the armor of the West, or at least the Republican right.
Absolutely. They are very actively shopping their ideas to our so called conservatives because they see a real opening there. And because our Republicans or people in general that might parrot their talking points, they really don't know that region. They don't know much about Russia or Ukraine. They may not realize that Russia really isn't a religious country at all, that most people don't go to church, and that the even the propagandists themselves, I often listen to them after they talk about, yes, this is a holy war against the West, and then one by one they will admit, well, no, I'm a good Soviet, I'm atheist, I don't believe in anything. But still, they like the idea because it helps them not only to recruit gullible Russians to go fight this war thinking they're doing God's work, but also it helps them to win over the Republicans who might say, oh, they're just like us. They're for traditional values. They're Christians. And it's not really what Russia is all about. And in fact, when Republicans have come up with this idea of banning abortions, that's a bridge too far even for the Russians, which they said they would never to even touch that topic. So religion is just a cover for Putin's imperial ambitions. It helps him to convince the people also using religion that he is not to be questioned, that was put in that position by God. And those that do have faith or believe in God, they are buying into it. And the Republicans just don't realize what they're looking at and what they're dealing with. Russia is very secular. There are religious elements there, but the country as a whole is by no means a religious country. And also, I've seen what Tucker Carlson, for example, dropped a little gift for them on his show when he claimed that Congressman Jamie Raskin said we must destroy Russian orthodoxy. Raskin never said that, but that clip of Tucker Carlson has been playing and playing all over the Russian state media saying, see, Americans want to destroy us because we are a Christian country. And it was a totally fake quote. Tucker Carlson basically made it up based on some other statements by Congressman Raskin that never said we must destroy Russia or we must destroy orthodoxy, but no one ever said that in Russia. That was a rarity when anyone would point out, well, did he actually say that? Because it's convenient, it fits their narrative. Even when Ukraine is dealing with Russian Orthodox Church back there in Ukraine is because they are saboteurs who are helping the Kremlin wage its war against Ukraine internally. So they dealt it in that sense, not because they were banning any religion or anything like that. There is no one banning any religions or any languages in Ukraine, as a matter of fact. But Russia is pretty skillful in exploiting these things. They will take a tiny little seed of truth and then they will coat it in as a snowball of lies, and then they're selling it, and some people tend to indiscriminately parrot it because it suits their agenda in some other way.
And this is the subject, I think, of a future episode, which I'm discussing with Olga Lautman, and that is to look at how the modern Russian church came about, how it was taken over, commandeered by the KGB, and how its current hierarchy are pretty much all ex-KGB officers. Although, as Putin has said before, there's no such thing as an ex-KGB officer. You're sort of in it for life. So that's something we're going to deconstruct, because essentially it means that the Russian Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarch is a political, almost a secular weapon, as opposed to a spiritual organization. But let's turn to the, let's say, the anti-Tucker Carlson, which could be embodied by your good self. There are a lot of initiatives doing incredible work to try and counter Russian disinformation, and I think your channel, your media output is some of the most powerful there, because it consistently undermines the propagandist narratives by sharing literally what they're saying and then explaining the nuances of that. Although often there's not that much nuance behind it. So how did this sort of channel grow? And I mean, not everyone watching this will know, but recently your material was referenced by Timothy Schneider at the UN. So it is having a huge impact. And of course, you've been sanctioned by the Russian government itself.
Yes, I have been looking at it from the perspective of not only a researcher, but also if I were collecting um, evidence for the war crimes tribunal. So sometimes I will focus on those statements where they talk about Ukrainians as bugs to be exterminated, or pigs to be slaughtered, or naming numbers of people that have to die or how they have to suffer. And also, it can be revealing because the way Russian state media shows are organized, on many of them, they will invite one guest who is the proverbial beating boy, who is allowed to make some comments that go against the grain, as though there is freedom of speech. That is supposed to be the illusion. And once that guest utters those comments, then everybody starts handpicking him and telling him how stupid he is, how stupid that point of view is. And that is meant to convey to the population this impression that if you believe this, or if you dare to question this, you too are going to be perceived as stupid and dealt with in this way, or you'll be seen as a traitor. But that often backfires when that beating boy guest says something profound that they have trouble arguing against. So it can be revealing and nuanced at that time. Just the way their military is not 10 foot tall, neither is their propaganda. So they often slip up, and they end up revealing way too much. And of course, there I am to take a clip of it. And the way it grew is because when I first started my collections debunking Russian propaganda, people would always ask me, well, where could I see this? And I would give them the link queued up to the precise point in the YouTube video, which at that time were being shown on YouTube straight from the Russian propaganda channels. But then once Putin invaded and their propaganda channels have been removed by YouTube, I could no longer do that, but people still wanted to see it, see them say it, or hear it in their own words. And that included Russian speaking people and, of course, non Russian speaking people. So that's what gave me this idea to start collecting some highlights or some segments that I would translate and create an archive there where people could go and reference it for any number of reasons. I have spoken to some professors who show it in their class, and I also went before Asha Rangapa's class in Yale, where we discussed it with her students and watched clips from these different shows. And there's really another dimension there when you can see it with your own eyes, when you can see their faces, their expressions, when you can hear them utter those words. It really leaves an impression, and you realize how real it really is. You know, those are not just cartoons there, or characters. They are performing a very specific task. In fact, when you hear propagandists being interviewed themselves, they say that being called propagandist is not a bad thing at all. Everybody is a propagandist. That's one way that they discount the truth, is by claiming it just doesn't exist, and everyone is a propagandist for somebody. So why wouldn't you be a patriot and support our propaganda as opposed to theirs? And that's how they frame it. So that's why even when they get caught in a lie, they're not ashamed at all, because they've already told people, well, it's all propaganda, it's info war, and anything goes.
It's a very post-truth kind of concept and world they've constructed. So let's go back to the roots of that. I mean, the history of the Russian state TV format. Soviet propaganda was not this slick, was it? It was pretty boring, unconvincing, and because it was ideologically based rather than emotive and based on nationalism, to an extent, it was far less effective than the current Russian propaganda. Um, but what are the roots of the current sort of format that Solovyov and Semenya in particular, the agitainment kind of format, that actually has some rather interesting roots, doesn't it? And not just in Russia itself, but say learning from Berlusconi's experiments in popular brainwashing of the sort of 80s and 90s.
Absolutely. They're kind of infamous at stealing technologies and copyrights, and this is no exception. They have watched the likes of InfoWars and programs like that, and they found out what works. They study the human psyche. They talk about it. They say anger works, fear works. If they can appeal to those emotions, or maybe even simultaneously to both of those, then they could achieve results. And people that are blinded by anger or fear will believe just about anything. And so they have picked up Western ways of, they watch our news coverage, but they don't do it like we do. There are checks where there's fact checking on our news stations that they don't have there. There are certain ethics that are in play that they don't have. They don't abide by the same sort of rules. So they're cherry picking. They're taking the very worst examples of what's popular in the Western off the charts propaganda methods that are not in the mainstream, but that are nonetheless very popular, and that's what they borrow from. So they have stolen our technologies, but they're using them for nefarious means.
And of course, in the West, you might have sort of Fox, AON, you have CNN, MSNBC, etc., etc. And each of those formats has its own bias, whether it's editorial or political bias. And of course, the Russians point that out and say, well, you're just the same as we are. It's no different. But of course, you don't have plurality of voices in Russia. You don't have multiple channels across the political spectrum that you can choose from. Do we know what percentage of the population actually watches shows like Solovyov's, and has it increased or declined since the full-scale war?
The numbers of people that are watching Solovyov's show are quite enormous. Although there have been some reshuffling happening with those numbers, and actually people have become fatigued by constant war reporting. So there have been some fluctuations on the shows that used to be extremely popular, like 60 Minutes, for example, are less popular now because I think people are experiencing a sense of such an oversaturation with this endless war material, and so that has had some impact. But Solovyov's show is very popular, and additionally, he's basically omnipresent. He's broadcasting morning till night. He has a very long radio show every morning, the days that he works. And then he also has an evening show and a Sunday show. He's everywhere at all time. And he gets a lot of people using that anger and fear formula that we have mentioned, because he really likes to agitate them and rile them up. And he's been making these trips supposedly to the front lines, although I've never seen him actually get anywhere near real danger zone. But he's been very involved in the war effort. He's collecting drones and funds and recruiting volunteers, so he's gotten himself immersed in that. He's recording commercials for Wagner mercenary group. So he's basically very involved in everything, and unfortunately is quite popular in Russia, because there again, their propaganda networks have done such extensive work over the last decade. Actually, more than that, because Ukrainians were always seen as just provincial villagers that are there at Moscow's disposal. And when they decided to assert their independence and maintain their own identity, that was seen as a terrible betrayal. And so it's all been downhill from there. So unfortunately, many Russians are preconditioned to see Ukrainians as someone that just has to be crushed into submission, and that Russia somehow deserves to control them. And therefore, voices like Solovyov or Simonyan that are arguing for that, they're quite popular.
And unfortunately, in the West, we can have quite a simplistic understanding of how both Russian autocracy or hybrid informational autocracy works and how propaganda works. I mean, the first assumption, of course, is that Russians will believe everything they see on these shows, which actually is not the case. I mean, Russians have been brought up during the Soviet Union to hold vastly contradictory points of view in their head. They've learnt to perhaps pick up information while still being skeptical of it. So it's difficult to know how much of it they believe, but the fact they consume it with perhaps sometimes an ambiguous sense of belief or not, I think that is a subtlety that we fail to see in the West. And there are other misconceptions. For instance, you mentioned these sort of so-called oppositional voices that get invited onto the channel. Even now, I see Western media reporting that as if it represents some kind of schism or break within the regime. And of course, it's nothing of the sort. As you say, it could be just to create, you know, a false sense of plurality. It could be that they bring these voices on so they can shoot them down. It can also be something which is quite interesting, which is throwing up points of view as a way of testing public reaction. So, as you say, they've said many of the things they were going to do beforehand. For instance, destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And one of the arguments is that that decision had not yet been taken, but it was one of the options on the table. And if the Russian public had vehemently reacted against that, they might not have gone through with the policy. So, in the absence of democratic process, it's a way of testing out the acceptability of ideas within the public.
Yes, or just getting them used to the ideas that they want to promote. But there are some opposition voices on their state TV that I'm sometimes amazed that they're there and able to say what they're saying. And so that is, you know, still good to hear, because they make a lot of sense. They argue that this war should end, that it will not end in Russia's favor in any way, or in the way Putin portrayed it in the beginning. It will not achieve its goals, and they're needlessly massacring so many people in Ukraine and by extension in Russia by sending them into these idiotic imperialist battles. So those voices I think we should still pay attention to, because while they're there for a purpose, they still make some very good points and they plant some very good ideas there. As a matter of fact, I've heard on one of their state TV shows, they said that there are millions of people in Russia that don't agree with the this war that Putin is waging. I'm not sure which poll they were referring to or where this information came from, but even the pro government propagandists did not object to it, did not try to argue against it. And I hear them often say that a lot of people there don't support the war, but they're just afraid to say anything, so they're just staying quiet and waiting it out. So, by the words of the propagandists themselves, you can glean what is happening behind the scenes there, and that not all Russians are in support of this war. A lot of them are just too afraid to do anything about it. Of course, unfortunately, we must realize that probably the majority do support it, but there again, they were conditioned to do it for the same reason they support the idiotic idea of nuclear strikes against the West that are promoted basically every single day on Russian state television. There again, because they've been conditioned to see the West as their enemy, and now by extension, Ukraine, that is being presented as a tool of the West to destroy Russia, even though it's Russia that invaded Ukraine and not the other way around.
Well, let's take that theme of the nuclear threat because, of course, it's a classic case of projection, isn't it? Where they say it's the West causing this, it's NATO causing this, whereas NATO and the West generally don't mention and certainly don't threaten the use of nuclear force. I'm interested in understanding the mechanics of this because none of these narratives that you share happen by accident. None of them are necessarily decided in the studio by the propagandists themselves. You know, they're iterating on themes that I assume have been approved from above. So how do we know how the mechanics of this work? How the intentions of the regime get passed down to the propagandists, and what kind of editorial structure and filters they go through?
There are notes that are being delivered to these television channels by their minders up above that tell them what they want to discuss, and in what vein they should approach it. And it's very interesting with the whole nuclear theme. Putin's regime is pursuing several goals with that. First of all, by continually talking about how this will inevitably end with nuclear war and the end of the entire planet, they're cultivating this fatalist mindset in Russians. Oh, we're all going to die. Then comes out Margarita Simonyan, who sits there and says, well, death is inevitable. So what is the difference if you die now or 20, 30 years later? It's not that big of a difference. So therefore, they're using that to get people used to this idea, well, we're all going to die, and maybe we'll all die very soon in a nuclear strike, so you might as well go fight for the glory of the motherland and die this way. And the secondary objective is, of course, their attempts to intimidate the West from continuing to support Ukraine by threatening them that eventually it will come to nuclear strikes. There again, when I listen to these propagandists, every once in a while someone will make a rational rebuttal saying, well, if we strike them, what's going to happen when they strike us back? And the answer to that is equally revealing. They say at this point, there's nothing we could do and they would strike us back. But what we need to do is continue to work on developing technologies that will allow us to deliver nuclear strike to them without them being able to respond. So the real issue here again, like the proverbial James Bond villain here, is not what they can do right now. They fully realize that they can't uh, conduct a nuclear strike against the West and get away with it. They know that. But I think more important point here is their mindset that they would gladly destroy millions if only they could get away with it. I think that is a really chilling message here. Of course, they can't do it right now. They know there would be a response. But if they possess the technology that allowed them to destroy millions of people on the planet, they would do it with no hesitation. That is one thing that I very rarely hear any of their propagandists object to. No one ever says, well, maybe killing millions is wrong. No, they just say, well, unfortunately, we can't get away with it right now, so we have to keep developing technologies so that maybe at some point in the future we could destroy them and we will still be intact. And they're basically saying that the whole world would be better off if Great Britain or the United States no longer existed, and that is their long-term goal.
And of course, I mean, there are many causes to the war, and of course, this is sort of debated and will be debated for many years. Um, and of course, you can see things from a big geopolitical point of view. And it seems to me that some of the core Russian propaganda narratives are to convince people that this is a wider, bigger geopolitical issue. That somehow Russia is uh, anti-imperial, etc. And some of those narratives actually go down much better in, say, the global South, Middle East, Africa, etc., than they do in Western Europe and the US, for instance, well, and especially Eastern Europe, of course, who have direct experience of living under the control of the USSR. And it seems to me that one of the key purposes of the Russian propaganda narrative is to control agency, is to deny agency to the Ukrainians. They're not a thing, they're not a nation, they're a pawn of the US. But they've been trying that same trick, haven't they, with Europe and the UK, essentially saying that our opposition to their actions in Ukraine is nothing to do with us. It's again just that we're almost like sort of puppets following the US's sort of dog whistles. That same process also elevates Russia to be a great power, which quite clearly, from the evidence of the war, it is not and ceased to be at the end of the Soviet Union. So what's your take on that? This sort of positioning that Russia, posturing rather, that seems to be inherent to their propaganda style.
Well, this is the exact reason why Russia sanctioned me, because I have exposed something they never wanted to be exposed, and that is the difference between how they portray the events within Russia itself to the Russians versus how they do it when they're trying to run their influence operations in the West. For example, when they're broadcasting to Western countries or when they're trying to appeal to Africa, Latin America, and other places like that, they will say that the U.S. is the imperialist country and trying to bring up and stir up those sentiments to say that it's the United States who's the colonizer and has to be resisted. But when they're talking amongst themselves in Russia, they openly admit that Russia is an imperialist country. Russia was an empire, is an empire, and will always be this great empire, and reabsorbing Ukraine and other former Soviet territories or formerly Russian Empire territories is their aim. And that has been pretty explicit, but you will not hear them uh, admit that when they're broadcasting to any foreign country. So that's why what I do is so important, because there they stand with curtains pulled back, and it reveals how they really see themselves versus how they want us to see them. And in the same way, the way they try to play this game against the Western countries, saying that they're merely puppets of the United States, when in reality they want all the countries in Russia's region to be their puppets or to be completely absorbed by them. So a lot of it is mirroring and reflection and gaslighting, and they're quite efficient in that until you see it both from within and from without, and you can compare and see what they're really doing and what they're really trying to achieve.
And of course, that internal propaganda, which you are, making available to a non-Russian audience, it's designed to achieve multiple things at the same time. I mean, if we look at it simplistically, we might just think that. It's talking to a captured audience, and everyone agrees with the propaganda. Whereas actually, it's far more complex, isn't it? The propagandists need to, one, convince the bulk of the population who are broadly speaking either apathetic or afraid. It needs to convince them to do nothing, to go along with the military operation, to not oppose it, to not become political. So it needs to keep that traditional sense of inciting sort of apathy and indifference. It needs to somehow talk to, say, the military blogger community. That's the estimated sort of 15 to 20% of the population who are actually quite extreme in their support of the war. And many of them don't believe the war goes nearly far enough, which is terrifying. And then you have a portion of the population, again, estimated to be about sort of 10 to 15%, although many, of course, have left in the last 12 months, especially since the conscription. And this is people who are actually directly opposed to the war, but as you say, not necessarily active. And the propaganda needs to appeal to all of them. It needs to stop the military bloggers, etc., getting out of control and trying to, prompt some kind of coup or whatever. It needs to keep everybody else apathetic, but also it needs to terrify that portion of the population against the war. And it needs to imply to them, yeah, you're probably right. This is probably terrible and bad, etc. And everything you think, it's actually true, but don't try to oppose it because you'll fail. And that is the kind of narrative of threat and terror and repression which actually worked in Belarus, because there was nearly a successful coup. And the propagandists realized that you can't just project onto people lies all the time. Sometimes you have to say, yeah, no, we're the bad guys, and this is terrible. And Lukashenko did cheat the election, but you're not going to win.
Yes, absolutely. And they're very consciously doing that. As a matter of fact, lately they've been talking about how the overly patriotic channels like those military bloggers are being influenced by the West. So now they're trying to terrorize them as well into not criticizing Russia's military strategies or the way this war is going, the fact that it's not achieving anything even close to what they thought Russia was going to get or what Putin was projecting. So they're definitely trying to attack everyone at once. The likes of Solovyov are constantly promoting the idea that they need to return to the tactics of Stalin's times, where they just shoot people on the spot, that they have these field trials for anyone who is suspected of being a traitor or subversive in any way or dares to criticize. They're constantly arguing for the imposition of censorship with respect to anything related to this war. So they're definitely sending this message to everyone that at some point we might just start shooting people for opposing this war. So rethink what you're saying now because you might be impacted later. And that has to do with a full range of people, from the people who are outspoken about not supporting this war, which is very dangerous and lands them in prison, to the super patriotic military bloggers who would like to see Ukraine totally in ruins as long as they can stick their flag into the heap and call it theirs. So they're definitely working those multiple fronts, and they have specific ideas, and also people who think that Russia should just withdraw from Ukraine and go back to business as usual. They have warnings for them as well. They're trying to scare them into saying that if Russia was to just abandon its pursuits in Ukraine, then the West will come, invade Russia. They will all have to live in cages. Their books will be burned, their language will be banned, and they will be just these mindless creatures totally in control of the West. Absolute fairy tales. But I guess there are people that might be terrorized enough and they actually believe it. Imagine if every channel that you had on television was hosted by a pathological liar, and that's all you had. Eventually, you would either be completely confused or convinced, and either one suits their agenda because confused people are not likely to rebel or do anything to oppose what they're doing. And obviously, compliant people will go and fight and needlessly die and kill others for zero valid reasons whatsoever, just because their propaganda told them so.
And of course, the propagandists lost their minds last week when the ICC announced the arrest warrant for Putin. And by extension, they can probably see that that same logic could apply to them as well. And you followed that sort of closely. This really seemed to hit home. And until this point, they seemed to think that there was a possibility that, even if they lost the war, they could perhaps, go back to some normalcy. This has shot that option to pieces, hasn't it?
Absolutely. They have always mentioned that possibility, but for some reason they thought that it would come to this only if Russia lost its war in Ukraine. And for this to happen at this point in time, while the war is still ongoing, really brought it home for them because in their commentary on state TV, they would say that they will come for all of us, of course, themselves very much included as active proponents of genocide and wars of aggression. So they fully realize that, and they're quite shaken by it because they're all accustomed to having their villas in the West, like Solovyov with his Italian villas that he is still crying about. There's scarcely any show where he will not say something about losing his property in Italy. He's just totally rattled by it. And I think they all secretly thought that at some point things will settle down and go back to normal, and they will again resume their hypocritical ways of living in the West, studying in the West, sending their mistresses, wives, and children to the West, while at the same time plotting to destroy the West if they can or undermine it. And now they see it's falling apart before their very eyes because when there are charges against Putin, inevitably propagandists that helped him destroy the minds of so many and get so many people to join this mindless war and kill and die in it, they know there's responsibility for them as well, and they were very rattled. And again, of course, that brought up the nuclear threats, which is at this point is kind of laughable. I think they've achieved the opposite effect. They have threatened so much and so often that people in the West figured out what they were doing, and I don't think anyone is actually taking those threats seriously at this point. So they have ruined the effect of it for themselves.
And because they are essentially a moral vacuum, because they're able to play in any argument, any side, no matter how immoral the events they're describing or terrible the kind of atrocities that they're justifying, I think in some ways they have assumed for many years that the West is the same, that the West has the same immorality, that we are prepared to suspend, our so-called morals and order for their money. I think they are genuinely surprised and shocked that the Western alliance in support of Ukraine is prepared to lose monetarily and materially for the principles that we espouse.
Yes, they are very shocked. They have expressed it repeatedly on their many shows that they did not expect the West to consolidate in this way, that they didn't expect the West would be willing to suffer economically as a consequence and still continue to support Ukraine, because in their mind what they anticipated is that would be something like what happened when they annexed Crimea. They got some sanctions, it didn't really hurt them all that bad, and then it was all relaxed and sort of accepted as a fact, and things went back to normal and no one stopped trading with them, and that's what they thought would happen. So they are very shocked, and they often say that they underestimated the West in this sense by assuming that everyone can be bought, and then they have discovered that the West does have a morality and is able to pick the side of good and do their best to defend it, because what we're witnessing is what was happening in Hitler's times, where some people were willing to look the other way regardless of how horrible the atrocities were, by just assuming, well, it just couldn't be that bad, because who would really do that? And we're seeing that unfold before our very eyes, where some people find it hard to believe that it's real, that it could really be happening, which Russian propaganda tries to play on that as well when they are discounting their own atrocities by just saying, no, it's all staged. Nobody does it in this day and age. So they've really underestimated the West and discounted the entire West as sellouts that could be bought and would look the other way. Fortunately, they have miscalculated, and now they're in this no-win situation, because now they're forced to admit and tell to their people, this is probably forever. There is no way back to this. There's no way to things being normal ever again. That the West is determined to remain on that side. And to them, that is like a cold shower that they did not expect. They're rattled and unsettled and not quite sure what to do about it.
And, when we look at social media and you compare the images that you're translating of the incredibly professionally put together studio with the cameras moving in and out and incredibly well staged despite the toxic materials, compare that footage coming from Moscow, showing a world, in control, as it were, controlled by the Kremlin, and then you see side by side with that footage of the Morbikian trenches being obliterated by drones, and footage this week even more contrasting, where you see T-55s, late 1940s tanks on train cars being transported to the front. It creates an incredible dissonance, which perhaps would only have been possible in the internet age.
Yes, and they actually tried to play that up as a positive, saying, oh, look, we're using this old equipment, but it's being transformed and it's being made just as good as the modern ones. And they're trying to play these extreme negatives as positives. The bottom line is they were totally unprepared for this war, because they underestimated everybody. They thought Ukraine would just collapse. They thought the West would look the other way, and there again, this is where Putin's rampant corruption played so strongly against him, because him and his group of oligarchs have robbed Russia blind, and that had to do with their military capabilities as well, because I'm sure that large parts of that budget were squandered or went into their pockets instead of making or replenishing their military capabilities. So actually, that is probably the only way in which corruption is good in Russia, because it really hit them when it mattered. And they're talking about imposing ammo restrictions on their fighting troops and trying to decide which division is fighting better than the other, and then they get to fire more weapons, which is just really um, just chilling in the way they're talking about it. So essentially, people who aren't fighting as well as the others, it's okay for them to die because they weren't allowed to use their weapons or didn't have as many shells or ammunition. So um, these problems, there are obviously many people within their own society that have to be horrified by this. They just don't have a voice to express it. But they're well aware of these problems and are trying to spin them as something positive, which of course they're failing miserably at that.
And it's a particularly vicious form of social Darwinism, isn't it? And they don't hide it. It comes through strongly in many of the propagandist conversations. And this is really my last question, because you've been incredibly generous with your time in this conversation. And that is, we're talking about terrible things. We're talking about an absolute stream of lies by people who are comparable to Goebbels, and the worst figures in history. And you're watching this day in, day out, hour upon hour of this material, at the same time as seeing the impact of it. And the impact is a genocidal, pointless war with terrible suffering. And I have to ask, how are you able to? Because I know, anyone involved in this, anyone who's paying attention, finds it quite hard to deal with all of these images. And I'm not even Ukrainian. I'm not living in Ukraine, and yet it's tough. How do you sort of deal with this, and how do you disconnect yourself from it, so you can have some sort of, let's say, healthy interests in life, whether it be sort of reading or running, or how do you disconnect from all this horror?
I certainly do a lot of things to get my mind off of it, but when I am immersed in it, I pursue it from a very clinical point of view. How would this play in their war crimes trials or tribunals? Which of this is relevant, or which part of it would be revealing to someone in the West that maybe didn't realize that this is how they think, that this is what they want, that this is what they believe. And I pursue it from that point of view. I know what they're trying to achieve, and I just don't let it get to me. I'm witnessing these historical events that are taking place, and I have to be cool headed and impartial when I'm collecting this evidence, because that is my contribution to helping the side of good have its say to document and collect this evidence that is helping Ukraine to wake up and shake up the world as to the reality of what they're facing and what their enemy really is like. For years, many people in the West did not realize how the Russians talked within Russia, because this didn't just start. Within Russia, they've been openly hoping that, for example, the United States would fall apart, that the Western system would fall apart. They were never our friends or aiming to be our friends. They thought it was fun to exploit the Western pleasures, but then do their dirty deeds at home. And so it's very revealing to be able to show to the world this is what modern Russia truly is like. Because if you're admiring Russian culture of the past, that is not at all what you're dealing with right now. And it's good to be sober and very informed to be effective against them. And that is what I'm trying to do myself, and to help other people, and also historians in the future that might be studying these events, so they could hear it straight from the horse's mouth. This is what was happening in Russia when this war was taking place.
So you're almost acting like a sort of prosecutor, or someone gathering evidence for future prosecutions, trying to set the record straight for future history, which I guess, as you say, gives it focus and purpose. And when we can only hope that, firstly, Ukraine wins, and secondly, that there will be retribution, against those who have incited and enabled this war, and especially the elite. And I think the work you're doing is extraordinary. And as you say, will hopefully play a pivotal role in those future prosecutions, which we all hope for.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And it's been a tremendous pleasure, Julia, speaking to you. And yep, we'll continue to follow and support your work. And many, many hundreds of thousands of people, I think, will join me in appreciating what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And likewise, appreciate everything that you're doing.